We'll talk a little bit more about bunkers. This is the infamous Big Bertha down at Royal St. George's in the south of England. And again, it kind of goes to what we talked about before the presentation with the hazard value of bunkers. People will tell you that sand's just not a hazard in golf anymore, and I say that they're probably half right. When every bunker is shaped to allow the ball to settle into the middle, the sand is totally consistent, everything is raked perfectly, the edges are totally manicured, it's a 3-inch edge all the way around, no edge on the backside, of course, so that you don't end up with an unfair lie, then yes, I would say that that's really no longer a hazard. And it's clear that pros would certainly rather be in a bunker than in the rough for that exact reason. When you watch good players play, they're up and down automatically out of the sand, and it's really a better place to be than in the rough. But on sandy courses, I think there's a long tradition of not worrying quite so much about the fairness of bunkering. And certainly a bunker like this still has its teeth as a hazard. And I think that the tradition on sandy courses dates back to the origins of bunkers themselves. They were rough and rugged, imperfect, kind of natural blowouts in the dunes. And when you see old pictures of the bunkers at St. Andrews, the old pictures of the Hell Bunker with these huge islands of turf in the middle of them and all manner of imperfection, that was a real hazard. And the kind of the fundamental nature of that hazard was uncertainty. You never knew what was going to happen when you went into the bunker. And I think you see that today at places like Royal Dornoch, at places like Muirfield, where, sure, you might end up with a decent lie and a chance to hit a ball over the revetting and play a safe shot, but you might be right up underneath that wall and be playing out sideways or playing out backwards. And for those of you that have watched a fair amount of American golfers play when they come over here, as I had the chance to do when I was caddying that summer, it's something that no one is really accustomed to, is the idea of, well, I'm going to have to play away from the flag on this shot. Like, no, that's not how bunker shots work. And you see guys throwing balls out of bunkers and just kind of, they finish the round and shake their head and don't really get it because they just, well, place is pretty, I guess, but I don't understand those bunkers. That's the beauty of bunkering, and that's the hazard of bunkering, is that fear of, well, what might happen. And as you all know, when you take away the predictability of something and the comfort level with it, all of a sudden as that fear starts to creep in and you start thinking, boy, I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that bunker, the more certain you are to hit it into that bunker. And a bunker that you flew past every time when you weren't worried about it, as you start to get nervous about it, now all of a sudden it's in your mind and it's a real hazard again. That's what you got with sort of the irregular nature of bunkers on sandy ground. And I think it's persisted even today in terms of both the design of the bunkers themselves and the layout. I was walking around Muirfield yesterday afternoon, and there's just bunkers all over the place. And sort of from the textbook architect's standpoint, you look at it from above and you say, boy, these are all unnecessary. This is a superfluous bunker. But as you all know, first of all, golfers don't hit the ball with any kind of predictability. And so I think almost any bunker anywhere on a golf course is probably in play. When you're playing on sandy ground, it's even more true because you've got firmness and you've got different wind directions, where a bunker that you'll drive 200 yards past when the wind's at your back is all of a sudden, you'd be lucky to clear it with the change in the wind direction. And so being free with the layouts and being free with the kind of character of the bunkers creates a really interesting and actually truly hazardous kind of environment. We'll go through a few nice examples. This is Royal County Down again. This is a really shallow bunker. It's barely a couple feet deep at maximum, but there's enough irregularity around those edges and you get enough of that native vegetation kind of working into the edges that there's a lot of nasty places to be in that bunker. And that one and all the other ones on the course are ones to be feared because of that unpredictability. And certainly you can shoot a huge score if you get in the wrong place in a bunker like that. It's very hard to create something like that away from sandy ground, and certainly to that degree of completeness with the native vegetation kind of creeping in, and you can see the heather and the marram grass, and they have gorse and broom around the bunkers as well there. Very difficult to replicate anyplace else, and a lot of places, you know, as beloved as Royal County Down is, if we built the same bunkers that are at Royal County Down at a modern course, a lot of people would shake their heads and say that you were crazy and say, no, start over. This is unacceptable. Sandhills, modern course, but again with that fantastic natural bunkering. A lot of imperfect places to be. A lot of easy shots. I mean, a lot of reasonable shots at the very least. But a lot of real disaster locations as well in a bunker like that. And that's the kind of thing that really keeps players honest and keeps the game interesting. It's never going to be the same twice going into that bunker. And it doesn't need to just be the really elaborate kind of naturalized bunkers that have become popular on modern sandy courses. I think that the traditional links bunkers in a lot of respects, when they aren't made too perfect, can have the same effect. This is Muirfield, the fifth green. And you see, like you see here, there's varying heights in the revetting. There's ways out of that front bunker. You could certainly play backwards. You could practically putt out the back of the bunker. But if you're going to take on that flag, you're going to take the chance of the more severe aspect of the slope. The left-hand bunker has no revetting on the green side at all, but has it on the very far back end. And so if you're just unlucky enough to really go at one of those back left pins and miss it, or at the very least you've got to think, well, if I miss this shot, I'm going to have absolutely no shot towards the green at all. I'm going to be playing backwards into the long grass or over into the next bunker as my best option. And that's what really keeps it honest. And you can tell that they don't worry about all the bunkers being the same there. It's fine to have a bunker that has a grass down face with one small section of revetting, and it's fine to have a bunker that you could putt out of the back of and barely hit the ball forward on the other side. It's not adhering to the rules that really makes the bunkers great. You should recognize this hole. This is your second. And certainly one of the absolute fundamental aspects of golf on sandy ground to really make the most of those firm conditions and the unique kind of bounce and roll of the ball is to have open approaches and to have the opportunity to play the ball on the ground up through the green. And again, it's something that really doesn't work well at all away from sandy ground because you're hardly even thinking of a shot 30 yards short of the green when you're playing on a course that's green and soft. It would only be if you'd mishit your shot terribly that you'd even end up there. And so you're just looking right past the approach and not even thinking about it. On sandy ground, the green is basically, or the approach is essentially a part of the green. And you need to understand the contours of the approach just as well as you understand the contours of the green, because it's all going to play into the same effect as you try to play your shot onto the green. Keeping those approaches kind of wide and firm and fast is part of what keeps them interesting and keeps them playable and what makes those strategic possibilities exist. But at the same time, the best sandy courses are designed, like Royal Dornoch here, where you need to place your previous shot in such a way that it's going to enable you to take advantage of that running approach. And that if you're in certain spots, you're going to have a bunker in your way, you're going to have a contour in your way, and it's going to force you to kind of reassess that plan. But the value of being able to play those running shots means that you really need to place your tee shots in order to take advantage of them, which means that something as simple as an open approach is all of a sudden dictating the entire strategy of the hole from the tee, which is the kind of design influence that it's very hard to get away from sandy ground because you don't have that firmness and because you don't have those playing characteristics that you get here. Another really important and valuable aspect of having open approaches, again, like room to play, is that it enables golfers of different levels to play the same course and enjoy it. I found that when I played golf here with guys that hit the ball much longer than I do, much higher than I do, we can still have very enjoyable matches and still have fun games, because if I'm accurate and if I'm really careful with my longer wood shots into greens that these guys are hitting 6 irons into or 7 irons, I can compete. And so I think that's part of what makes golf great, is that different players can compete with one another on the same course, and that you should be able to compete on the same course and enjoy it over the course of your entire life. I mean, a lot of you probably learned how to play golf right here when you were young, when you could barely hit the ball off the ground. And I'm sure a lot of you hope to be able to play this course when you're old and don't hit the ball as high as you did when you're a young Gary Gruber there and kind of start to scuff it along the ground a little bit more. That's something that gets lost when courses are soft, when courses are narrow, kind of the stereotypical American golf course. I worked at Marion for a summer, and the older members gave up on playing the East Course, the famous one, because it just wasn't fun and wasn't playable for them anymore. And I thought it was a pretty sad thing that the course that you joined a club to play, you can no longer enjoy because the conditions and the design are outside of your abilities. And so now you're down the street at the West Course with the rest of the guys that you helped build the club with, kind of just doing the best that you can. You don't see that at places like St. Andrews, where you see very old people enjoying the course alongside very young people. Open approaches and firm conditions are really the heart and soul of that. Complementing those open approaches are closely mown surrounds. This is the 16th green at North Berwick. That's all one green for those of you that haven't been there. Very narrow, very difficult to hit double plateau green, and as a result, recovery play is kind of the name of the game at a green like this. And you're going to miss the green far more often than you hit it. And as a result, you're going to be playing a lot of recovery shots. Having those surrounds tightly mown as opposed to surrounded with rough really creates a very interesting kind of golf in that recovery play that, again, gets lost when you're playing in lush, kind of thick green rough where you tend to reach for the same club every time. It's going to be sand wedge or pitching wedge, and it's going to be a question of execution. It's have you practiced that shot enough times to be comfortable with it, and you're going to do it all day long, and if you're good at it, you're going to be fine, and if you're not, then you're not. With tight mown surrounds and kind of firm and fast conditions that you get on sandy ground, there's a huge range of recovery shots that can be played around the green. You'll putt from 30 yards away sometimes. You'll use a 7-iron. You'll use a wood as a little bit of a putting wood. And you can still try to play that flop shot, and we'll still probably need to play it, but all of a sudden, it's not a go-to shot, it's a really high precision shot. And all of you that have played out here and have tried to execute that kind of 60-degree wedge off the firm ground, you're this close to sculling it over the fence and kind of kissing it goodbye every time you do that. And so it becomes a more significant shot to try to play. In addition to all these kind of extra strategic options, you get a little bit of a hazard value out of that as well. Pinehurst number 2, a course where I worked on the restoration, is famous for kind of having these turtle shell greens. And for an average player like myself, who's going to miss a lot of greens either way, I think it's great that you've got these closely mown surrounds, and they're fun, and I can play a lot of different recovery shots, and it really adds a lot to the experience. To the guys playing the U.S. Open this year, every time they just miss a green, rather than having the ball settle 6 inches off the green in the rough, it's now going to roll entirely off that putting surface and 20, 30 yards away out into some tight mown area where it never would have gotten if that had all been rough. And so the closely mown turf kind of acts as a buffer for some of us and then acts as a hazard for others, which I think is a pretty interesting dynamic, made that much better when the ground is kind of firm and tight. And so those two kind of work in synergy together. This is another really good example of it. This is Old McDonald at the Bandon Dunes Resort. It's the newest course at Bandon Dunes. This is their version of the road hole there. And you can see that the green is just surrounded by a swath of fairway. And it creates a lot of interesting shot opportunities. You can see that some of those contours will help you work a ball onto the green if you come at them from the right side. And then there's other contours that are going to deflect you away further from the green and leave you with a really awkward chip and run or some kind of a flop shot over these contours back onto the green. Everything around this green is kind of a fascinating problem to solve, and that's something that isn't found in a lot of recovery play away from sandy ground. And so you've made it through all of this, gotten past the bunkers, made it through the fairway, and finally arrived at the green, and you're safe, right? This is the ladies' putting course, also known as the Himalayas at St. Andrews, and is an example of an extreme example, but an example of what's possible with some of the greens on sandy ground. I think that courses built on sand have always had the wisdom to recognize that firmness and contour are of more value than just pure green speed. And that's something that's been lost over time in golf. The more that you kind of focus on green speed, the more that greens are built to accommodate that green speed. And the end result is greens that get flatter and flatter and flatter. And while they're fast, no matter how firm you get them, they don't really have the ability to deflect the ball anymore. And what you see on greens like the ones you have here is that the contours are strong enough and the greens are firm enough that you need to account for that bounce of the ball when it hits the putting surface itself. And all of a sudden you need to be thinking about the tilt of the green, the rolls in the green from all the way back on the tee, because you need to be coming in from the perfect angle in order to use those contours to either hold your shot up or steer your ball towards the flag. And if you end up on the wrong side of them, certainly you know that there's spots out here where you can hardly keep a ball on the green if you're coming at it from the wrong angle. That's something that doesn't exist when greens eventually just get flatter and flatter and flatter, all just to make them faster and faster. And another thing that sandy courses have always had going for them, again, like the bunkering, is that tradition of not worrying quite as much about what's fair by some kind of a modern standard. And so unusual green contours and slopes are common on sandy courses. You see that at the Old Course, you see that here, and you see it throughout the world of sandy golf. Fall-away greens, punch bowl greens are all things that are kind of frowned upon in modern design as, you know, being either unfair or gimmicky in some regard. And yet all the best courses built on sand seem to exhibit those characteristics. And so you're able to have more interesting contours that have more impact on the game when you're focusing on those firm conditions that are possible as opposed to just green speed. Here's a great example. This is the 6th green at the National Golf Links of America. And this is a green that basically breaks just about every rule of modern green design kind of in one putting surface. You've got the punch bowl in the center there, a fall-away green at the back where that pin is, and a firm green. They don't worry that much about the green speeds there. And really the key to it is how are you going to land a ball on the front of that surface and play it through those contours and get to that flag, rather than trying to shoot a dart as close as you can and then putting on a green that's 14 on the stimp and putting off the green. And mercifully, places like that have had the wisdom not to try to fix the greens. And certainly there have been people that have gone through and have told them, you know, boy, you could get these greens a lot faster if they weren't so undulating. Charles Blair Macdonald made a survey of all the Scottish Links courses before he returned to the United States to build the National Golf Links, and crafted his course as an example of all the ideal principles of golf that he found here, and then brought back to the United States to kind of give birth to, you know, what he thought of as real golf. And so greens like this one are part of what he saw as ideal and really should be preserved in a lot of respects. I think it was sad what we saw last year or the year before with the flattening off of the Eden Green at St. Andrews to, in their words, make room for more pins, but basically to accommodate faster green speeds. And, you know, while that specific argument could be made in that specific case, I think it sets a pretty dangerous precedent on, you know, what direction is golf on sandy ground and links golf heading when you're altering the greens on arguably the most famous course in the world to accommodate a tournament it has once every 5 years or something at the Old Course. And even more scary is where does it end? So hopefully somebody has the wisdom to hit the brakes, but we'll see.